I'm delighted to open this morning, the second morning of the Dybbuk workshop, with our keynote address by Professor Mark Slobin. Professor Slobin is the Winslow Kaplan Professor of Music Emeritus at Wesleyan University and the author or editor of many books on Afghanistan and Central Asia, Eastern European Jewish music, film music, American music, and ethnomusicology theory, two of which have received the ASCAP Deems Taylor Award, Fiddler on the Move, Exploring the Klezmer World, and Tenement Songs, Popular Music of the Jewish Immigrants. He has been president of the Society for Ethnomusicology and the Society for Asian Music. He's a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He retired in 2016 after 45 years at Wesleyan and now lives in Manhattan. Professor Slobin, we're so happy to host you here.
Nice to see you here. I'm delighted to be here. I wanted to thank Ruthie and Edwin Sarusi for arranging this trip. I had a wonderful time at the conference yesterday. There was such a wealth of research and reporting about the structure of the plays. And then today we're getting to my field, the music, which is I'm very delighted by. I'm going to do three things today. First, I want to take us visually on a little tour of the notebooks that were mentioned yesterday. As you know, these things were not, they were published, they were actually sort of pirated and published in Europe, Lateiner plays, but for the most part, they existed in handwritten versions, just like the music, which I'll get to. And so we talked about what I thought would be nice to visualize and show you the kind of the complexity and messiness of the notebooks. I got into this area of early Yiddish theater music. As Ruthie mentioned, my dissertation, my first book is on folk music of Afghanistan. So, but around 1973, I got drawn into the idea of studying something I knew about instead of these people out there that were so hard to understand. I said, what would it be like? I say, well, what do I know? Well, I know some Yiddish, and that's my background. And so I ended up at YIVO, the Jewish Music Research Institute, the Jewish Research Institute in New York. I walked in, it was exactly when there was a revival of interest in Yiddish among younger scholars, people like me who were changing fields, and also new grad students who are now, you know, major people in the field were just coming in that period in the 70s. So I was very lucky to be there. And they said, oh, please, nobody's working on the music. Anything you do. So I said, well, then what do I do? This is like an enormous, you know, possibility. So Hanam Lotek, the great archivist and scholar and activist in Yiddish song, said, you know, Mark, when you're here, could you tell us something about this? And she pointed to a row of boxes all the way around the seminar room, black boxes. She said, this is the Perlmutter collection. We have no idea what's in it. We just got it. Could you, while you're here, could you look through that? And I said, this is crazy. This is like King Tut's tomb or something, you know, like you're giving me this, you know, archaeology of Jewish music, of Yiddish music. And most of the stuff in the Perlmutter was theater music. So I got very interested in how that worked. And then they also showed me this huge collection of sheet music. Many of these songs printed in sheet music, and I'll talk about that, were songs from the theater. So I just got so drawn into that material that I waited to do actually older kinds of Jewish music studies and Yiddish music and ended up with this stuff first. And that ended up in this book, Tenement Songs, Popular Music of the Jewish Immigrants. So I'll talk, but it's been 40 years since I thought about all these things. So this invitation made me go back to the archives and rethink, you know, some of this material, and I really enjoyed the process. So I'm going to start with looking at those, some of the notebooks themselves. Then I'm going to take look at some actual music, and thanks to Daniela here, we're actually going to hear some of the songs as well that I'm going to be referencing. And then I wanted to talk about, since we're talking about a reconstruction project here too, reconstructing this play, 3 projects I did of reconstruction. So I'll just reference those a little bit too at the end. Okay. So let's start by looking at some of this amazing material. So when you open these notebooks, you find all kinds of stuff. You find things in German, right, as we mentioned yesterday. And then you also find all this other wonderful marginalia that gives you a lively sense of the working process and who is using these books. Go on, next. And these books look like this, some of them, okay? So we know that these were done in New York, but the idea that that these plays of Lateiner are in the Mark Twain composition book absolutely delighted me as an indication of the integration in a sense. Next. So they're full of signatures, as you mentioned yesterday, and the signatures with the dates. So we get Windsor and the places, 02, 06, 99, okay, going back there for these Lateiner plays. And the signatures of people and these very funny kinds of scripts, and handwritings, which we talked about yesterday as being so complicated and to work with. Next. And here, I don't know why they doodled these Mogendovids there, but here's the Weissman and Wilensky, these very important people who were, these things were preserved, by the way. This whole set of things that's at the New York Public Library was given by a guy named Minikis, and I'll talk about him actually much later. He was an interesting guy in the Yiddish theater. He was a manager type, and so he just kept all these copies. And then that whole collection was donated later. Next. Let's see. Right, and then you get things like this. Eigentum von Herrn B. Tomaszewski, director of People's Theater and for a Lateiner play. So then it's sort of extraordinary to see the actual handwriting and the fact that this Tomaszewski used this particular thing. Next. And this one says right on it, Joseph Lateiner. It seems to be signed Lateiner in 1901. This is the original manuscript of a play titled Gabriel. It says right here, and for 1901, and it's signed by Lateiner. So, there's sort of a thrill when you look at these obscure notebooks. Next. And then there's just a lot of funny stuff. So we didn't talk about costumes much because we don't know enough about costumes. It's really too bad, just like we don't know much about dance. This whole multimedia thing where costumes were extremely important. I mean, the whole way that Tomaszewski triumphed in Lateiner's Alexander was because the costume showed off his famous calves. And all the ladies swooned, So the costumes can be extremely important as a part of the affect of a play beyond anything you can read in the script. Next. What this is doing with the ice tongues and the chair and why it says da hast du, who knows, but they're sort of intriguing. Next. And then you'll get these things with the cast of characters and the dates and things like that. And you can see this play has Dora Weissman and these famous people were in this play, and Shane Gold and Spivak and Zolotarevsky. So, you get a lot of extra information here and all those weird spellings in the Yiddish and Germanized Yiddish that you get. Next. And then you notice, we said this yesterday, but just to reinforce that, how provisional these things were. So there's a nice script and somebody has just messed it up completely. Rewriting, rethinking, and of course this has to do with who's there tonight and, what are we up to and did that make sense and all this kind of thing. So it's nice to see that. Next. And the crossouts, this is a palimpsest. This is like an ancient manuscript, and of course this is what you went through, trying to make some kind of a working edition of any play that comes out of these sources. It's really a complex issue. Next. Okay, the music is similar. Here's the big X right through all of this, and it says cut, right? So, it's nice to look at this. It's nice we have the original, and they didn't really block it out, but we've got solo damen and we've got tenore, but they decided, whatever reason that singer wasn't available, or whatever reason, or the show's too long already, you just simply improvise these things. Next. Yeah, and then there's another cut too. And here we can see some of the way the originals look with the pizzicato on the bottom and the chorus coming in, and so forth. Next. Let's see. Oh, we already saw that. Now, why is that still there? Okay. So let's go on a little bit to the songs themselves. So musical items, as we said yesterday, are marked with a big capital N. This suggests that music helps to structure the script. So when I say sense and sentiment in the title of this talk, it makes sense. Music helps make sense of the whole thing, and partly through not just the text, but through the way it's positioned as in the dramatic architecture. And that, of course, if we were doing a serious, study, we would go through all of that and try to go through a lot of plays and see exactly how the architecture works out. Sometimes the numbers jump, though, indicating intervening musical moments that weren't flagged. I don't know whether the N indicates the relative importance of the numbers or just the casual nature of the scripts. The number of indicated singing parts runs from 1 to 8 in things I looked at, named characters, and to whatever chorus meant. I suppose the chorus size must have varied considerably depending on availability. As to choral makeup, a notation like Männer Chor, male chorus, gives some sense, but with groups of peasants or crowds, it's hard to know the likely gender distribution as well. Sometimes rows are actually marked, as in a number labeled Tanz, that specifies first Vier Damen, for ladies, then Vier Mädchen, spelled like that, girls, and Vier Knaben, like this, Germanized thing, boys. But then it switches to Vier Mexicano, okay, 4 Mexicans. So that's starting a play with an opening chorus is a fairly common trope, and there could be an ending chorus as well. In a Lateiner play called Sedernacht, it says, "Das singt Chor mit Chasen in Schule beim letzten Akt." Okay, so this is sung by a chorus with the Chasen, the cantor, in the Schule for the last act. Okay, so music there is clearly offering a dramatic architecture that goes with the staging. Remarkably, the Dybbuk that we're looking at has choral appearances in 2/3 of its numbers. This is way more than in other plays I've looked at. Outside of songs and choruses, you can find occasional mention of sound effects like Trompetensignal, okay, trumpet signal, or bells. Some manuscripts offer substantial indications of orchestration as well, and if we had more time, we could look at all those orchestration examples. About the songs themselves, the first question might be, who sings and how do they sing? The interplay between individual and collective fates is a constant in these plays. Personal destiny is hampered by the authorities or by the family, usually, and music can help to characterize the social settings then. The court, the masses, Jews or non-Jews, types like the gypsy, the Arab versus Jews and Christians, or outlandish figures like the Mexicans that I mentioned. Musically, these configurations and types interact with the stock roles, standard roles that you get from play to play. The comic, the ingenue, the hero, and the villain. And of course, these are well known from European dramatic and operatic and cultural history, those absolute basic types of characters. The romance can be simply private, or it can be out there in public. The villains can be secretive or out in the open. The melodrama side of this demands social reintegration. This is sort of an aspect of melodrama that's unavoidable. You have disruption, often an outsider coming in or some kind of disruption. And I'm talking about classic European melodrama of the 19th century, which is very much behind so much of Yiddish drama as well. And then you need a social reintegration, like in the Mozart operas, which can be personal reintegration, familial, or collective, large-scale social integration. Music makes all the options possible through the choices of who sings when, in the choice of the verse forms and the language registers. Not surprisingly for what we've been calling Shund drama, although we're questioning this term. It's a critic's term, not an insider's term. And so I'm very wary of the term. But Deutschmilisch is frequent or dominant in many roles. That is that very highly Germanified Yiddish. But it can be juxtaposed then, the juxtaposition with colloquial Yiddish, this shift of registers. Now, the song structures, I was impressed with the considerable range in the song structures in terms of rhyme schemes. Are they consistent, inconsistent? What kind of rhyme schemes? The length of verses, the structuring of verses, and the amount of repetitions, because they will mark, using the word bis, they will mark sometimes 4x, so you get this thing repeated over and over again. If I had more time, I'd run through a whole selection of those, and that would be sort of a larger study. The rhyme and the verse form can be very tightly structured or remain rather loose. Let me just show you one here. Here's one. And so you can see this. This one says bis viermal, and this is just bis once, and this is bis again. And if you look at these in the Yiddish, you can see there's some sense of verse form, but it's not consistent. So here we have an A, B, B, A, right? Allein, ja, nein, and wenig and klingen, which are not exactly, I'm sorry, singen and klingen, which do rhyme. In a couplet form. But then you'll get like the next one that doesn't have a structure, a verse structure, the same verse structure. There seems to be no demand to have a consistency of structures, which would set that apart from, more formal forms like opera or oratorios or cantatas or other things that, are very strict in the way they want to structure rhyme and verse form. It's very flexible. How many lines? You see, this has like only 3 here, where this is 4, which is more common, the quatrains and the couplets, and why there's just only 3 here. And this one has an A like BB rhyme. So, and so this is labeled both of them, beta, and they will often do this thing, addressed he and she, instead of giving the names of the characters. So it's sort of, in a sense, kind of interchangeable that way, just to have types, he, she, and then it goes back into kind of dialogue. The flexibility of how knowing how much of this is sung and how much of this is not sung is sometimes not so clear in these manuscripts, because it looks like it's over, but then there's some rhyme, and it looks like maybe they're still singing. And you'd really have to work on that to figure out the flow. But that is what I've been calling sentiment or sensibility, to use that kind of word, is in that articulation, really, of the structuring, I think, of the songs. That could use a really large, a large study eventually. The diversity of the song and of the types of songs and the verse structures jibes with the encyclopedic nature of this kind of drama, Shund drama, and music. They make free use of all the genres and songs and chants from within Eastern European Jewish expressive culture. I mean, everything is in these shows. Badchanis, okay, the wedding thing, the wedding bard, as he's often called. The solo lyrical folk song might appear, which is usually women's, the solo and the group Hasidic nigun, liturgical song, paraliturgical song, and the emerging types of new songs of kind of literary origin, all of which are combining, are available, accessible in what I'm calling an encyclopedic form. We lack any real survey of the range of Yiddish poetics across all these genres. I mean, so it's hard to put the songwriting practices here in context in a very volatile period of modernization versus nostalgia. And, you know, we talked about that just a little bit yesterday. It's a very complicated period when you're getting to 1890s, around 1900. The look back, but at the same time, the present situation, the allegories that are always there of some other world of Jewish persecution, but it's really about now probably the topical updating that might have been probably within the show when it was put on as an improvised format, and the varieties of music that go along with this. The songwriters and composers were also fully conversant with and willing to borrow from mainstream European styles of opera, operetta, and popular song. For a Lateiner play called Jerusalem, the arrangers drew in Schubert's well-known Marche Militaire suddenly. Dum, da, da, dum, da, dum, da, da, dum. For a pagan general, okay? And in the same play, they use Hatikva for the finale in the temple, which is maybe a shade anachronistic, but that doesn't matter. It's the symbolism again. It's the sensibility that counts, not accuracy. These shows are not about accuracy, okay? So the older and newer layers of Jewish genres and items mix freely with melodies and genres from local and pan-European sources, from cantorium music and klezmer to the Hasidic nigun. But this suits the background of the singers. The singers had these multiple musical backgrounds. There is a story about Goldfaden at the beginning of the Yiddish theater that he would audition an actor, and he had a composer standing there, you know, behind the door, and he would say, "Sing something," and the guy would sing anything. Maybe he was good at singing chazonas, or maybe he was good at, and so they would take a note of what he could sing, and then they would put that into the show. So the idea of, and that's probably a lot to do with that, which is of course the way Handel worked too. Okay. He varied the thing according to the range of that soprano, and you know, Verdi and Rossini, all these people had to do that too. But here it's about the background of many different types. So many of the original composers and songwriters had been Meshoiler, in their youth, that is to say, an apprentice to a cantor. And we have this in their memoirs. I'll be talking about Mogilescu because he's one of our favorites, and he appears so much in the Lateiner world as well. But he started, of course, as a Meshoiler, but moonlighting, singing in churches, okay, and so forth. And the range of experience that they had as kids, I mean, they literally kidnapped boys from their homes and apprenticed them to cantors to wander about, and they were treated really badly by the cantor's wife or whoever for years until they got old enough to be able to make some kind of claim and find some other kind of work. So those are fascinating stories, but that definitely affects, you know, the nature of the music, is the availability of talent and what that talent could deal with. So songs for the high or low romantic couple, or for a hero or a comic servant that might fall actually into just song types. And this was useful for me and all of us if we're doing some kind of reconstruction. The Orphan's Lament, for example, you know, this is sort of a genre and it cuts across plays. The Lullaby, the Hasidic group song. All of these can be pretty interchangeable from play to play. This is not just a matter of how Shund worked. This is popular theater's reliance on character types expressed as song types can be found everywhere, from Shakespeare to the Javanese wayang kulit shadow puppet play, or in many parts of the world. This is an emanation of an example, an incarnation of the notion of popular theater, which actually there's some, as distinct as this Yiddish world is, it is sharing a great kind of commonality with many world forms. We have a fully worked out score we're going to look at later, so I'll just do a couple of sample pages to show what the manuscript version looks like. This is from Alexander, the play that made Tomaszewski famous, and we've got the text in here, Ach Tochter, Tochter mein, and so forth. Kennst du ihm, wer ist der Mann, And it says, Fauseia flumer alter was ich hab sind gesagt. I mean, the syntax and the language of these things is really weird. It's not like normal Yiddish of any kind, and it's awkward. It's actually extremely awkward. But here we see how one of these pages would have looked. It says Futter, and this is a very simple, clean version with the pizzicato. And then it says 4 flats. And notice how sloppy this is. It says 4 flats, but there's 3 sharps. But the 3 sharps don't continue down the rest of the page. So the guys who were reading this, they just had to figure it out as they were going. What key are we in now anyway? Okay, and we have cornet, trombone, and then Alexander. These sets, you don't get full scores. You mostly get sets of instrumental parts. In the Perlmutter collection, it was all instrumental parts with no conductor score. And we were talking yesterday about the dissemination of these plays. Some of these were in the envelopes with the stamps from different parts of the world on them when I opened these boxes. So I could see this was mailed from New York to Vilna, or to Cape Town or Cleveland. I mean, all these places where they were getting this set of parts and they're using local talent to figure out how to do this show. So everything changes depending on, and some of those things, and I wrote a short article on this once, it's signed out in Czechia somewhere, and it's got the names of a regimental band, okay, that have checked out this part. So this is probably even non-Jews. So you hire the local band when you're doing a show in some part of Bohemia or something. That nature of the musical world is so fascinating. So that we can, the most poignant one was one of these set of parts, I forget now, it might have been Shalamas, was dated Vilna 1940. I mean, oh my God, this is the absolute end of the Yiddish theater world, in the as we knew it. So, is there another? I can't remember if there's another page. Yeah, there's another one here. Okay, so yeah, start here. It says so. Okay, so do we ignore all the rest of this? I mean, what do you mean start here? From where? Lebe wohl geliebte mein, and there's that Deutschmarisch, okay. Oh yeah, you've got the text on the right there. Geliebte mein, lebe wohl, okay. So we want to listen to some music, and I want to do now is take this repertoire off the stage and out into the actual world of the Jewish population. And this is because of the invention of lithography. By the 1890s in America, it was possible to sell 1 million copies of a song. The first 1 million sellers, like in the 1890s, you could do that. And so a small population was not so small of Jews. There were like 1.5 million Jews living in the densest population of any place on the planet was the Lower East Side, okay? Literally. And this is an incredible market. So you could have a subcultural system of music making and music publishing, which I describe in Tenement songs. It's quite extraordinary. And then you got sound recording, phasing in with this, which allows these tech-based expressive cultures to travel from Euro-America to Buenos Aires and wherever. And this happens to all the musics of the entire world. They get reduced to these 4-minute or 3-4 minute sides of discs and to printed music. And so this goes with the spread of the piano and the gramophone into the home, into immigrant homes. And there's a synergy of commercialism and entrepreneurship that reaches out from the theater into the world. And that's the part that fascinated me first. I think we have the next slide. Let's see, go on, yeah. Oh yeah, so if we're gonna look at the one on the right. So this is what we're doing here. We're gonna have Daniela be this girl, okay? And you would see this in the shop window and it tells you what to do. It's prescriptive. It says, take me home. Put me on that piano. That girl will play this, and those people will shep nachas, okay? That's what it is. Now, it has nothing to do with the fact that this is called Ov HaRachmon. I mean, what has that got to do with this image, okay? Well, it doesn't, because this is a stock cover that they use for all kinds of songs. So that's how commercial enterprises work. They just produce a mass-produced object, and the content is kind of like the secondary, in a sense, to the object itself and its circulation. So this is new media. This is as much new media as our new media today, when this is happening in the Yiddish world. And that's where these songs go, okay? So, okay, we have the next, let's see. Yeah. So we're going to, I'm going to really run over time probably, but we need to hear some music. And so this whole idea of reception reminds me of Ruthie's work on people listening to recordings and, you know, how theater goes out into the world. So Danielle is going to come up, and we're going to look at a little published music of Lateiner plays, listen to a couple things. Blimele, the play called Blimele, and David's Fiedele, the one that I first worked on. Blimele credits Zygmunt or Zelig Mogilescu, whose contribution to the early Yiddish theater we're all recognizing now. And nobody heard of him, but we've been working very hard on getting him famous now. And I'll talk about a play that I did based on Mogilescu's work. The extraordinary thing is he wrote this piece, which is the only surviving piece outside of the couple songs of Goldfaden's. It's the only surviving piece of music from this period. It's Kosim Kala Mazel Tov. This thing is still played today, and Mogilescu did this 125 years ago. So it's amazing about that. Blimele. So what I'm interested in playing you these pieces is one only aspect of musical style I want to mention is the tonalities that are used. What are the tonal structure of the songs? This is a feature of Yiddish music in general. Does it sound Yiddish, or what is Yiddish sounding, and what is this sound, and does this sound have any consequence or significance? I talked about that just a little bit in tenement songs. And so the shifts from major and minor to the more Jewish identified tonalities is something that interests me. So we're going to hear the march from Blimele, and you see it says Lateiner and Mogilescu. So here they have equal billing in this opera, which is interesting. The writer and the musician. So let's.
I'm going to take the repeats or no?
No, I guess we could probably live without repeats. We'll be here all day, right? Section 2. Another section, okay? And listen to this, completely different, okay? Okay. So this is a march. A march is not an intrinsically Jewish genre. And there's 4 sections with different tonalities and different sensibilities. It's like an overture, in a sense, to an opera where you get the different themes. And it's internally structured kind of biculturally because a couple sections are straight European sounding, right? Straight mainstream sounding. And then you get the minor and then this raised fourth scale that we think of as being kind of Jewish. I want to run through very quickly the 4 published numbers from David's Fiedler, David's Violin, or The Magic Power of Music, which is this play that I did a reconstruction of at Wesleyan University, a kind of WASP elite college, just before this, in 1976. Okay, I'll get to that in a minute. So we're going to go through, but only 4 numbers from that show were published. So the question is, why did they select those 4 numbers? What's the nature of those 4 numbers? So the first one is called Das Kriegele. This is in waltz time. It's very, very simple. Oh, sorry, we were supposed to have seen the music. Oh my God, okay. I didn't notice that. Keep going. Yeah, next. Yeah, and the next. Yeah, okay, here's Das Kriegele, which is marked valse, and it's very, very simple and straightforward in its way. Das Kriegele, right. So you see that weird switch from minor to a Jewish sound that just happens in the middle of there, and we don't know why that's there. I mean, this is the stuff that intrigues me. Is it doing something? I think it is doing something ethnically. I think it makes it Hamish in a certain way, because otherwise it's completely da dee da 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 dee da da da. That could be anything written in 1902. You know, so. What are we to make of those things? Okay, the second item is the Vier Hasidim. Yesterday we only got up to 3, but in David's Fiedler there's 4 Hasidim. So the question is, how do you do? Yeah, could you? Well, no, back. Yeah. So we need back one more. We just need the beginning and then on the right. Yeah, and then we're going to move when she plays. So here's the Vier Hasidim in 3 in triple time. Not a typical really for Hasidic music. But okay. Okay. learn how Hasidic is that. It starts very neutralized, and then suddenly there's a reference, okay, to one of these scale types, but it's a type, it's a stereotype thing, but it's not like, where is that coming from? This structure of his referencing Hasidim that way. And there are sections without text, they're all for dances, and they're obviously dancing a lot of the time, as people always are. So when you hear that last thing, that could be maybe what's a ritornell. We were wondering what a ritornell is. It's a turnaround, you call it in Western tradition, a turnaround, when everybody, like in a minstrel show and stuff, when you have a little musical thing and everybody is dancing. These are some of the complexities that are hard to deal with. Okay, there's two more items. The couplet Noach is a drunkard's song. The drunkard be called Noach is maybe a Jewish reference, I don't know. And the text is simply, nein, nein, ich trink nicht mehr. Okay, I'm going to stop drinking now, when clearly he's not. So the text isn't even there here. So this is mostly, again, you see the dance allegretto. Okay, okay, so let's hear the couplet Noach. Okay, thank you. That's lovely. Again, this could have just soon been the Fir Hasidim, right? I don't know why he's singing with this Fraigish and all this stuff, this guy. And it sounds, in a sense, more Hasidish than the Hasidim number. Okay? So it's hard to read this stuff, in a sense, that way and figure out what is the sensibility and what are they really up to. I want to spend a little time, and then we'll hear a recording of this one. The final culminating song of the entire David's Fiddle is this song at the end, Dor Halech v'Dor Bo. And the subtitle of the play is The Magic Power of Music. So, and it's literalized here. Just to give you the background here, here's the setup. Tevye, the local pillar of society, and his brother David are the two main characters. Tevye has been swindled by his false friends, although he's the president of the shul and he's the good, and he's been swindled, and he's ready to hang himself, which is not very good in the Jewish tradition, right? He has also refused for the children who love each other to marry the boy and the girl. David, who left town and was a klezmer, has now a world-famous violin virtuoso. So he's the generation of the Odessa violinist. He's Misha Hellman, and he's come to town disguised as a klezmer to see what's going on. And he takes off his disguise at some point, and they say, "Oh my God, who is this guy?" And so he comes along and he plays this song on his violin, and Tevye's and everyone else is healed through the magic power of music. The thief who would steal all the money comes out from behind the bush and gives it back. And the couple are allowed to marry, and there's another final celebration, rejoicing reintegration. Okay? So the music is much more carefully constructed than the other published novels. This is a really interesting piece of music. So you can see it says ad lib. So when the voice comes in. So it's a kind of cantorial recitative crossed with opera. It's very clearly operatic. And at the same point, well, these two worlds were absolutely conjoined at this point. When Tomaszewski is a boy, his mother, he's a good singer, his mother takes him to the Key of Opera to have the choir master listen to him, and he says, he's got talent. Let him apprentice with a cantor for a while and come back, and maybe we'll let him in the choir. So this guy understands that the training of cantors is that substantial. So the switch between the two it's not a switch. This is one expressive culture active at this point in time. This is 1897, right? So let's hear it on the piano, and then we're going to hear the recording, which I think makes another point. No, keep going. Oh, that's all you have?
That's all I have.
Oh, how peculiar.
Does it continue on the next page?
Oh, yeah, it does.
That's a continuation. Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You must have been out of order in the email. I'll keep going. Okay, here we go. This one?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. We finally get to the refrain, the chorus. Like the major ending? Okay. So I want to play the recording from 1917. So that's 20 years after the show. Victor put out this song, which means that people still remembered it and thought people would still buy it 20 years later. So the durability of the music, as opposed to maybe this play that maybe went out of fashion or got cycled off the repertoire, is really important. In this recording, you'll hear this Chazonos cantorial thing, but it's being sung by a guy named Mishalov, who is not a singer, and you can hear at the end, you can see there's this high note, da, 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 which he can't really quite make. So this is a period of unprofessional singers still, which then gets cleaned up later by Joseph Rumshinsky, who professionalizes the performative style so that people are better trained musically. But it doesn't matter. That's not what people were listening for, apparently, even by 1917. They're listening for the affect in the song. And this Dor Halech V'Dorbo, Alters Gei Schlofen, is what a word, what a term. Which means the old folks have to give way, but it's sort of a funny phrase, isn't it? Alters Gei Schlofen. But that's the level of the poetry sometimes too in this stuff, okay, as we've been listening. All right, I want to listen to, I think it should be there, yeah. You hear the accompaniment? It's very operatic, right? The flute and the... Okay, so that's what ad lib means, and how what you see on the page is not probably how people perform things, right? This is extreme in its rubato sensibility. It's a sensibility issue, okay? Any characterization of the sheet music and recording from Lateiner plays, it does seem kind of reductive. We don't have that many recordings, and the stuff we have, and, you know, when you take a sample, as we do, because it's such a huge corpus, we're simplifying in a way, and we don't know how the live performance worked, although this is kind of a nice tip-off for how a live performance might have worked. Where's the gap between the remembered music of people that went to the play and the reproduced music of people sitting at home? There's these gaps between the stage and the living room. We do our best with this, and what we do to try this out sometimes is to reconstruct things. So I'm just going to, in a couple of minutes, sketch out and maybe show you some pictures of the first one. So I did David's Fiddle in 1976, as I said. Oh, we have to switch to the other file now. You've got the other file. The reason I did it was I wanted to understand how popular culture worked, how popular theater worked. I didn't understand how popular theater works from reading descriptions. I said, I'll do it myself and then I'll understand it. I'll go to a college campus, so we have to have it in English because otherwise the audience is not participating. They have to know the actors and be interested in their lives. So we had a mix of faculty and student performers. So everybody, oh, there's Professor so-and-so. And then we did a very simple, I didn't do a whole orchestration because it was too much. We did violin, clarinet, and piano. There's only 4 published numbers, so I plugged in generic things. There was an orphan's lament, there was a lullaby, there was, you know, and these things. So I took those from other shows in the sheet music universe and put this show on. So I just want to show you what the staging, because you're going to be doing staging. Can we start from number 1 or where it is? Let's see. Oh, this is my late wife, Greta, as Mina the orphan. So we got some of our, you know, we did our best to do some staging and go on. Let's just run through these pretty quickly. Here's the ingénue, who was an undergrad. We got some decent costumes together from people in the theater department were really nice and chipped in. Next, yeah. Oh, there's me and Neely Bruce playing the music. It's 50 whatever years ago. And next. Oh, that's Tony Connor, the English poet who wrote the English version of this. I gave him a rough translation, and he made a kind of funny English version. And he's playing the drunk, Noach, the drunk who looks tipsy. Okay.
He's holding a cake?
Yes, he's bringing in, there's a cake celebration, and it's a smashed cake. And we actually had somebody who was really good at baking cakes and made the cake. You know, people really volunteered for this. It was part of this kind of popular theater thing. Next. Next slide. What's happening here? Okay. So here are the Fir Hasidim. Here's the whole cast. On the right is David, and that's Richard Van, distinguished historian, professor, undergrads, and this is I got somebody in the dance department actually did a choreography for the Fir Hasidim. We got these outfits. I mean, it was really kind of remarkable that we were able to put this together to this extent on this stage. And there's one more maybe.
Where's the backdrop from?
That was just around somewhere, you know. There's, distinguished professor of classics who plays the guy who steals the money and then the money gets returned. I think there's one. Yeah, there's one more of David. Yeah, David with his violin before he's revealed himself. Is that all? I can't remember. Looks like that's all. Yeah, there's not the one of David. Anyway, so this gives you some sense of one kind of reconstruction that I did to figure something out about the system. It's about local culture in a sense and how you do that. I just want to, really, I'll do this in 2 minutes. Honestly, I will. There's a difference, and I talked about this in tenement songs, between legitimate theater, this thing, which is the legitimate stage, and then there was vaudeville. And there were stuff that happened in wine bars in New York and elsewhere, in basements, and they put on shows. And we don't know anything about that. Nobody talks about it. So we don't know what they did, except the great one exception, which I found in Zilbertzweig, and I found the one existing copy of this in New York Public Library, is a play called Zwischen Indianer, Among the Indians. And it takes place in the Dakotas, and there are two peddlers from New York, Jewish peddlers, selling suits to the people out there, Indians, a woman who is a farm woman and her black field hand, and a bunch of Indians. And they're all talking about the price of goods, and they're singing. Okay, so I wanted to put that on. Now, I don't think I could do this today, but in 1980, I actually was able to get away with putting on a bunch of stereotypes on stage. And I actually had an African-American student in the class who said, I'll play the black person. So I said, oh, okay. So we did that show. But there, the Reconstruction, again, I had to figure out, I had to write English verses for tunes that I thought would be the right tunes to put together for Willie and Harry singing. The reason that this thing survives is the booklet for the evening at the Windsor Theater in 1897. It's the same period exactly. This is all the same period. And as the show goes on, you don't know what is the show about, why they're selling these suits. And it ends up that one of these guys is Schlemiel and never sells suits, and the other one always sells his suits out. And the reason is that his suits come from Minsky's clothiers. And Minsky sponsored the evening. There's pictures of Minsky's factory and everything in the book. So it is a giant plug. Okay? Now, that's the only surviving example of Yiddish vaudeville, but it sure is interesting. Okay? And it precedes, Mel Brooks, Blazing Saddles or whatever, by decades and decades. And how hip they are in trying to deal with the American scene while talking about Yiddish issues and doing it all in Yiddish. There's different registers of Yiddish. There's German Yiddish, and there's New York Yiddish, and all these kinds of things. And the people speaking their own, Indian and black and stuff thing. And I'll just in 2 minutes mention that way after this, and I put on at Wesleyan finally in 2011 a thing I'd written earlier about Mogilescu. So I thought I'll create my own popular theater show. So it's a one-act musical play called Mogilescu, A Tale of the Yiddish Theater. And I figured a way to get at this whole period was to do a contrafactual thing. So it's about conflict between Mogilescu and Goldfaden, some of which we sort of do know about, where Goldfaden wants to do this serious dramas, serious historical dramas, Shalamis and Bar Kokhba, and Mogilescu says, come on, we do this other kind of stuff, we do Shund. And there's this tension between the two, and it's had to produce some music, in addition to original music, some contrafactual music that didn't exist that a friend of mine who's a composer wrote. And make Mogilescu out to be this kind of really entertaining character. And so that was my other way of kind of reconstructing that world by kind of making it my own version of it, finally. So I just have to say in closing that music is so vitally important in making this kind of drama that we call Shund both successful in its time and really durable to the extent that it's still, can be used by us today in various ways. So thanks for your time. And thanks to the artists.
I think we have some time for a few questions.
Oh, okay.
From the audience. So if there are any questions, then this is the time.
Yeah.
I was, first of all, thank you very much. This was fascinating. I'm curious about the relationship between this theater music and klezmer. And I mean both in terms of the musicians themselves, if they are coming from that world, if they are also still working in that world as wedding musicians. But also, at least some of the melodies that you showed, especially the Noach one, seemed very instrumental in its character, using the formulas that we know from klezmer, but also speaks quick and virtuoso. So anything that you want to share about that, I'd be curious to hear.
Sure. I don't think we know enough about who actually was hired to play the music in these shows. I don't, I mean, I wish we knew more about that. There's obviously an interface, but it's not totally clear to us, I think, what that interface is between those two worlds of live weddings and stage weddings, basically, is what you're talking about. Because there has to be a wedding in every one of these shows. And yes, they're well aware of the klezmer literature. And we imagine there was more interpolated music than we see, because you could just say run a wedding. You could probably just run a wedding and the guys would know how to play it, and the people would know how to dance something. And the audience was in on all that too. I don't have a good answer for you. I don't know of a lot of accounts of klezmers saying, "Oh yes, and then I used to play the theater as a part-time."
Paris did a lot of theater, but that's decades.
Yeah, that's way later. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this. I'm coming at this more from a dance perspective, and I was thinking about the Hasidim. It was difficult for me to imagine choreographing that in a way that wasn't in some way caricatured.
Well, probably.
Yeah, so I was sort of curious.
We assume that the stage Hasidim are caricatures because that's the tradition of the period. Sure, I would imagine so. Yeah.
I just want to ask you about something you mentioned. I wasn't sure if I understood, which related to improvisation.
Yeah.
Did you? Because the example that you showed us is very much in the style of opera, that it's rubato and it takes.
Yeah.
But it's not improvised.
No.
But you actually mean that in the musical numbers in the theater they were improvised also on sort of.
Well, there are whole sections in these scores that say ritournelle, and we don't really know what that was. There are sections that say melodram. So they would play music while the action was continuing, which is something that happened in European melodrama. It's not called melodrama for nothing. There was music. And so there's mood music, in these things. And that would have been all improvised. So, there's a variety. It isn't just the numbers, with the big ends that were done. There was like music playing probably quite a lot of the time. That, just saying music. In this, and we don't know what that meant when they did music. Or you'll get these interpolations. I love my favorite one when I was looking through Perlmutter. I said, "What does this say?" It says Yankee Doodle something on the side. And I said, "Oh my God, that's Yankee Doodle in G." And it's spelled Yankee Doodle. So, he just scrawled that in there. Now, we didn't know when there was this coming to America, somebody would suddenly just start playing Yankee Doodle, okay? Because that's where we are now. So yes, I think there was an awful lot of improvised music in this. Yeah.
The question that I really only struggled with the first time today, and that is the fact that you get on the one hand, the fact that we know that a lot of the spoken part was improvised.
Yeah.
At least sometimes in the Yiddish theater. On the other hand, as we saw some of those libretti or scripts, sometimes there's clearly very careful attention to which words are cut and which are included.
Yes.
Where it indicates kind of meticulousness.
Yeah.
The word. So do you think that represents maybe differences in quality perhaps of performances, or just different styles or different genres? Is there a significance to?
I wish we knew. You'd have to do a much more exhaustive study of these notebooks to come up with a really good answer to that. I think maybe there were guys who were much more meticulous and really wanted, this is my show, we do it my way. And other things, the famous stories are they arrive and they say, "What are we doing tonight?" And they say, "Oh, we're doing that. Oh, you play that part, you play that part." I mean, that's also part of the lore. And then I think there are other people that did want some control. And then if the play went on for weeks, then there would have been a lot of flexibility in addition to a lot of precision, because the audience expected everything to happen a certain way. But then they'd want a little variety. So, we just don't have enough insight into that. Nobody filmed any performances for us, and we don't really know. We just like making these guesses from what the little bit that we know. Yeah.
Maybe just the last one.
Right.
So you described vaudeville as something completely different and happening in other places, and we know even less about that.
Yes.
But if you could say a little more about what's actually, how do you differentiate between the two? Because we have, as you said, encyclopedic, the nature of
Right.
the legitimate shows is also very open and changing, And also the vaudeville, the example that you, I mean, as bizarre as it is,
Right.
it still had a story and a
Yeah.
So why do you describe them as so different?
Well, because we have no trace of it, and because it was understood it was lower in a sense. It's like sub-Shund, you know, the sub-basement. It's the sub-basement. They were in basements, you know, and New York was full of like basement performances of where people were probably, I mean, that's how the Yiddish theater started with Goldfaden. They were just improvising, and it was more like vaudeville then. Yeah, I think early Goldfaden was like, the Brodersinger were like that. They just arrived, they improvised, they dragged things, or they dragged people in, or they did whatever. And then you get the idea of a legitimate stage, you know, and you build a theater for it. I mean, there's capitalization, there's huge capitalization to build these theaters. There's you know, staffs, and there's budgets, and there's, you know, stock companies and repertory. You know, it looks like a legitimate stage, the Yiddish theater, in its height, in this period that we're talking about. Whereas this stuff is really fly-by-night, I think, in these other venues. But I don't know, because nobody really talks about it. I went to the vaudeville last night. There was this hysterical piece. You know, I don't know. I wish I did, but it was just this surviving thing was so tantalizing.
Are there any videos? Video recordings? I mean, not video, like film recordings, like tape. I remember watching all of those short skits from 1940s from New York in the University.
Oh, yeah, but that's another world. Yeah, that's a totally different world. Yeah, but not 1914. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I'm excited to open this panel, our next panel, on the musical reconstruction of Abraham Hellman's music of Joseph Lateiner's play Der Dybbuk. Before I hand the microphone to my colleague musicologist, I'd like to say a few words about the research process of the musical part of the project. In fall 2018, I spent a week at the YIVO Archives in New York, skimming through dusty boxes and listening to old sound recordings. My visit at the archive had a clear goal. I was looking for Joseph Lateiner's The Dybbuk, and indeed I found it in the form of its musical scores. This panel and the roundtable following it are dedicated to the musical reconstruction of these musical scores. In this panel, we will talk about the reconstructed music, explain the practice-based research, listen to some live demonstration and fragments from the musical score, and discuss the intricacies and challenges entailed in the musical reconstruction of the play. In the roundtable following this discussion, we will talk about the music of the play more broadly and the methodological problems of historically informed performances. But before I hand over to my fellow musicologist, I wish to briefly unfold the long process of the music of Lateiner's Der Dybbuk has undergone during the last 2 years. The musical score of Lateiner's Der Dybbuk were written by Abraham Hellman. We don't know much about Hellman's biography or career, as he's not mentioned in the Yiddish theater chronicles or lexicons. However, remaining sheet music and scores point at his intensive and prolific involvement within the New York Yiddish theater enterprise. Hellman apparently wrote songs, composed or arranged the music for Mogulesco's operetta Blimele, that we heard excerpts from, and for operettas such as Bas Cohen, Eliyahu Hanovi, and Nebuchadnezzar, all written and produced by Moshe Horowitz. And furthermore, the archival materials remaining from his work connect him with the chief composers of popular theater output of the 20th century in New York, such as Joseph Brody, Arnold Perlmutter, and Hermann Wohl. The outputs of these composers were legendary in their high production volume. They created and arranged theater music for a large demand of Jewish audiences for Yiddish musical theater. And thus, this professional network positioned Hellman's musical score for Lateiner's Der Dybbuk as paradigmatic in its themes, forms, and practices to the music performed at the popular Yiddish theater in New York. Composers working in the field of Yiddish theater music shared many stylistic qualities. The work were comprised from an alloy of various styles, as Professor Slobin showed us this morning, including citations from canonical Italian operas, Jewish music, Russian melodies, and Romanian folk music. And furthermore, the music of these composers was subjected to many adaptations. It was performed in changing instrumental compositions and was dynamic in nature, often subjected to stylistic improvisations. The archival files containing the performance music scores of Lateiner's Dybbuk were incompletely preserved. Their papers were torn, some of its pages were mixed, the instrumental parts were separated from some other parts of torn and old papers, and many parts seem to be missing. Additionally, two dates appear in the archive's inventory as related to the musical score. One is 1888 and the other is 1898. The place is New York. And thus, we still have no clue what the music of this performance was like when it was performed in Europe prior to its arrival in the US. The instruments participating in this musical score are trombone, cornet, bass, cello, flute, drums, clarinet, and a violin. This is where Uri and Edwin entered the scene. They meticulously learned the score and reconstructed it. And because of the rather lean nature of the musical score, Uri inserted some musical guidelines that would enrich and basically make the score playable. Following their work, we could then also play and experiment with the score, as we did when we handed it to Shai Alon for a digital performance and to Daniel Hoffman for a live performance that we will see today. This process raised many questions, some of which I'd like to surface and discuss during our next two sessions, such as, to what extent can the creative process of archival musical reconstruction reflect the professional practices of the Yiddish theater composers? To what extent should the reconstruction present the original music of the performance? And to what extent should we allow divergences from the score that would reflect its historical dynamics? And if so, when does a musical reconstruction stop being historically informed? Our textual musical reconstruction stand next to our embodied experimentations with Lateiner and Hellman's work. Today, we will listen to two variations to Yuri's musical reconstruction of Hellman's work. The digital adaptation stands next to the live presentation of the score, and this will enable us to talk about the qualities of digital versus live performances. By doing so, we wish not only to understand the oral and sensual aspect of the performance of the Dybbuk, but also probe into the idiosyncratic qualities of embodied knowledge. So before I hand out the microphone to my fellow musicologists, I'd like to thank all the wonderful musicians and that joined us in this adventure, and especially Uri and of course Edwin for an intriguing creative process and an intellectual experience. For me, this was a very meaningful learning experience. I learned a lot from our joint session and discussion, so thank you so much. So without further ado, I'm happy to present our two speakers. Professor Edwin Saroussi is the Emanuel Alexander Professor of Musicology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and the Director of the Jewish Music Research Center since 2000. Since 2008, he is a visiting scholar at Dartmouth College. His research focuses on musical cultures of the Mediterranean and the Middle Eastern, interaction between Jewish and Islamic cultures, Judeo-Spanish song and popular music in Israel. Within these subjects, he explores processes of hybridization, diaspora, nationalism, and transnational and specific contexts as the Ottoman Empire and the constitution of Jewish identities through music making in settings as diverse as colonial Morocco, Algeria, Germany's Second Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the early Zionist settlement in Palestine, and the Judeo-Spanish-speaking diaspora. His approach to research stresses the agency of individuals in the shaping of folk and popular culture, social networks, and the role of reception and composition in the making of musical cultures. And Dr. Uri Brener is a pianist, composer, and arranger who earned his PhD in composition from the University of Bar Ilan. Yuri's music is performed worldwide. Among performers of his music are IPO under Zubin Mehta, Israeli Philharmonic Orchestra under Zubin Mehta, Jerusalem Symphony Orchestra, Israel Chamber Orchestra, Tel Aviv Soloist Orchestra, Aviv Quartet, Continuum Ensemble in New York, USA, New Juilliard Ensemble, and many others. Uri has won a series of prestigious awards and scholarships, among them the 1906 and 2017 Israel Prime Minister Prize for Composition, an Akum Award, which has been awarded 3 times in 2008, 2010, and 2015, and many others. Since 2007, Uri was a composer in residence of the Israeli Sinfonetta, and since 2016, he served as musical director of the Mikro Theater in Jerusalem, and in 2017, he became director of Ron Shulamit Conservatory in Jerusalem. And they will later be accompanied by live demonstrations arranged artistically and directed by Daniel Hoffman, who is a violinist, composer, and documentary film producer, and is among the top international players of the klezmer fiddler style. He's currently a graduate student at the Hebrew University in the field of ethnomusicology and can be heard playing with Harel Shachal and the Ottomans at Shafa Bar in Jaffa on Monday nights. So that's tonight. So today, Daniel will be joined by pianist Nadav Rubinstein and the singer Vera Lozinski. Thank you all so much. This is such an incredible experience. Edwin, and Uri, the stage, please.
Thank you, Ruthie. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Uri.
Good morning.
מה שלומך? Good.
So far, so
we're
good.
thrilled to be here. Well, you may wonder after the introduction that Ruthie read what the hell I'm doing here. So, I sort of asked that myself, but I hope you will understand what led me into this adventure. First of all, a long-term connection with Ruthie, since she was a graduate student. We go a long way together. And once she received this amazing award, the ERC grant, I asked her to hire me as a research assistant, which she did. And this is part of the results of what we're doing. Ruthie mentioned Ruthie opened yesterday the whole workshop with some background on the very idea of the Dybbuk, on the topic. And also we musicians, we live in Ansky's Dybbuk shadow, and the music composed for the Dybbuk by one of the greatest modern Jewish composers, if you agree with me, Yoel Engel. Here is a picture that people don't show that much of Engel when he was still a lawyer before he became a musician. And the common sense, I'm quoting here my colleague Dr. Rita Flammenboim, that Engel was the first to write the music for a Dybbuk. Of course, she refers to Engel's Dybbuk, but the idea was that there is no music for Dybbuks before the Dybbuk. And I'm just paraphrasing the title, Ruthie, of your article. Well, I just want to say that we do have music for the Dybbuk, and that's what we're going to see now. So my presentation basically is a recapitulation of Mark Slobin's presentation. It's exactly the same presentation, but the focus is on the Dybbuk. The same subject, the same issues, even you will see a couple of the same images. So how could I escape that destiny? The only thing I want to make a point that we mentioned already yesterday is this categorization of these two Dybbuks. So you see, I wrote the Dybbuk versus the Dybbuk, Dybbuk. All these are the spellings of the name of this play in the different scores that you're going to see. So we even don't have a real final name of this Dybbuk. And I don't want to divide the world into black and white, but basically there are so major epistemological differences between these two pieces, in spite of the fact that they all are around the same axis of this idea of the Dybbuk. So I will just not read this part of the slide, but the other part that belongs to Lateiners, and art as an expression of collective against the individual subjectivity, subverting the sacrality of tradition. In Engels' music, the traditional music is sacred. And here, there is a subversion of that. The carnivalesque that is so prominent in this play, the blurring of conventional genres, Mark already mentioned that. The otherworldly, instead of having the allure of mysticism that mysticism has for the moderns, it is much more of a presence in daily life, something that is more common. And I would use Mozart's very interesting formulation for Don Giovanni, dramma giocoso, okay? Something that has both of the drama, and Ansky is a real drama, but it's also has a very heavy humoristic background. And just one more very small remark. Don't take musical notation among Jews as something for granted. And I'm saying this here actually on my first incursion into Jewish music was as an assistant of the late Professor Adler on the huge volume Hebrew notated sources of music, on the beginnings of the use of music notation by Jews. This beginning goes only 60 to 80 years before the Dybbuk that we're trained now. So the fact that Jews so fastly absorbed the how do you say, the miyumanut, the skill of using and adapting musical notation and using it for the purposes it's not new. Here you have one of the oldest manuscripts from the Birnbaum collection in Cincinnati of Eastern European nigunim from the around 1920, this type of music, okay? So, recovering the archive, this is the beginning of our work. This is what Ruthie was mentioning, what in 2019, she sent me all these files and said, Edwin, I don't understand what's going on here. Can you help me with that? And that's how we started. So this is what we call the direction. You see, that's the name of this document. It's a very clean and clear copy, Uri, that includes 18 or 19 numbers. You will see why it depends on how you count it. And I put 20 in quotation marks. You will see there is, in other versions, there is a piece number 20. For me, the direction is the force source. So Sinai, there are 3 only columns in the synoptic Dybbuk that you presented yesterday, and Ruthie told me we cannot add a 4th column. But the score brings another text that does not correspond one-to-one to any one of the 3 texts that we have, and this is something that the continuation of the project will have to take care. Working with Professor Adler, I became a philologist, which is today a curse in academia, but I'm still proud of that. And I also took care of the different types of musical paper used, which is sometimes a clue regarding the dating of the pieces. Now, these are examples of the parts. On the second batch, on the second trip, Ruthie, you discover even more parts of the Dybbuk, which help Uri to reconstruct parts of the orchestration. The parts are very messy, as you will see in the continuation. And we have another important document. Here it's like another direction. It's not called direction, but it includes 11 numbers. And as you can see here, we have a name, Solomonescu artist. And this score corresponds to the performances in Yashi from June 15 to 27. So we have precise dates, and the more we see the different musical parts, the more we will be able in the future to trace the trajectory of the Dybbuk throughout Eastern Europe, because we have a lot of information in the scores. and here too, this is German paper of 12 lines, and I know I can today through the internet you can see even where the paper was produced and what period. So I won't go into that. I look for Solomonescu, and of course it wasn't very difficult to find him at the Friedman Great Archive of Yiddish Song. And Solomonescu, Oscar Osias appears also in the Hebrew Actors Union Archive. Born 1869 in Yashi, moved to New York in 1901. So the question now methodologically, is this his part? But he's a singer and an actor, and the part doesn't have the text. The part only has the numbers in which he sings. So it's interesting what is the status of that score. Solomonescu was very famous for transpassing gender identities in the theater. He was a very interesting figure. Now we have another score. This is apparently another New York version. Here is where the piece is called the Dybbuk, and is defined as an operetto in 4 acts. Eventually, we have 5 acts in the other versions. This is another Direction number 2, okay, of 19 numbers, and it includes an ora at the end, okay? It's called Ora Nacional. I will show you that. And this this is the first draft out of that the primary direction was made, the important direction. And now look at something very interesting, and this is maybe another point to think about. Who wrote the music? So the score is the property of Mr. Abraham Hellman, as you can see. However, there is something in Romanian written for our Romanian readers, okay? So I put it big for you, and I can read a little bit of Romanian too, okay?
So
but musica arranged by them, I don't know.
That means
yeah, but it was very clear from the beginning about Finkel. Okay. Now this Finkel, whether he composed, arranged. What means arranging in this type of music that is so malleable, so crossing boundaries, okay? Is he only the arranger of what Hellman wrote, or did he a little bit more? He brought his own stuff. Moshe Finkel is not a small figure in the theater. He's a prominent one. Okay, from the very beginning, he was one of the most important composers in Bucharest in the early 80s, and he based mainly on the work, he put music mainly to the works of Joseph Lateiner, so the connection there is very clear. He wasn't a very easy man to go along. He killed his wife and the lover of his wife, as you can see. I don't want to go more into that, but the great Jacob Adler said that this guy never smiled. So not a very funny man, but an amazing biography. So he's part of the Dybbuk now, part of the story, okay? And we have to address him too. As Ruthie mentioned, there are several documents regarding the performances in New York, and this is one of the scores mentioned an exact date. That's what Mark already showed us, that the scores always refer to specific dates. So if they perform from this page in February 19, did they have some other page that they changed something in February 19? Questions open for further research. Another, here, the Dybbuk is called operetke. No operetto, but operetke, okay? So some Yiddish diminutive, so we have another genre. Another example from the Direction, and here you see all the cues, okay? The Rabin, Yenkel, the core, and the chapeau, which I think it refers perhaps to the dialogue regarding the chapeau, okay? All in very little music. It's really the shorthand of a score. It's like a code that only those who really know the secret can decode. We have the same piece in several of the sources, and we can compare. And sometimes they are written, I'm sorry about it's a little bit blurred, but this is the one of the nicest numbers, the dialogue between Amalia and Leon. It's sort of barcarola in the operatic style. And our version, what Uri, you did this from this version, it's written in D major, but actually the song is in G major, and the other version is in F. So the different versions are in different keys, of course, adapting that to the different singers. But however, here there is something else. When we approach the piece more in 6/8 like a barcarola. But in other places, it's written in 3/4 as a waltz. So the issue aesthetics, we can discuss this in the afternoon in the reconstruction, which tempo to take, which approach to take, okay? A lighter one or a more slower one of the waltz. Sometimes you see this is a third version in another direction, and here what you can see shortcuts. Okay, number 4, da capo, number 2. So you go back to a choir that was before. However, the numbering of the selections change. In some of the scores, this repetition is taken into consideration as number 4. In other versions, as you see, it's called nummer 3.5, okay, that repeats number 2, so that the sequence, the piece that in the other version is number 5, here is number 4, okay, so the versions don't coincide. Here you can see once again the difference in the writing between 3/8 and 3/4, and in the second version, you can see that there is a short intro that is not in here. There is, I'm sorry, the third version. Uri, we missed this one, but it has a short intro, okay, to this nigun that Uri is going to talk a little bit more. A short intro that gives us the clue that there may have been other intros in order to, as we talked yesterday, to allow for the change of the scenes. And here you see another version. So we have 4 versions of the same piece in different keys, in different tempi, in different types of metrical settings. And also in between the text, sometimes it's impossible almost to read, but here I expanded it. You can see staging performances, who is singing, the different repetitions, etc., and more indications. I won't go into that. Here we have probably one of the earliest scores, Odessa, 1882. Okay, so it's very short after the premiere, which I thank Michael Lukin, who helped me to decipher the handwritten month of November. And here is very similar to what Mark show you. We have another piece which earlier performances on the same year, okay? Earlier performances, Chernovitz, Mitrița. Is there a place in Romania called Mitrița? I couldn't find it. So I don't know what they mean by Mitrița. Also, it's written 25 Septem. I don't know if this is September or September, the 7th month of July. A lot of stuff here to decipher, but a lot of information about how the Dybbuk was evolving also musically from city to city, okay? So we can trace a path. Now, some of the performers appear in the, as Mark also showed, in the in the scores. Adolf Finkelstein, I found him also on the records of the Hebrew Actors Union, clarinetist. So the musicians used to have also their own parts. Okay, so they used to carry their own parts, and also the director used to carry his own parts. And to what extent they are similar, it's interesting. Here, Uri, this is for your question in the first section, okay? We have a signature. Again, I need Romanian here. I couldn't understand, again, my Romanian dictionary, series, I don't know what that word means. P. Bugici. We talked yesterday about Bugici, okay? Now, these Bugicis are not a small name. This is one of the greatest klezmer families in Romania. So one of the Bugici klezmer, professional klezmer, was playing in the Dybbuk in that date, in that city. So we do know a little bit about the performers. We have more here about Mr. Hautzman, the trombonist in 1889, and so on and so forth. Now I move to the Reconstruction and I move to Uri. Here is the timetable that Ruthie already mentioned, how we came together. I have to say thank you to my colleague, my young colleague, Dr. Michael Lukin, which we had a long conversation when I showed him the scores that Ruthie sent me, and he immediately said, Uri Brener, he is the man to take upon this huge task of making all these pieces of paper sound again in an articulate and convincing way. So here we are, in April of 2022, a year ago, Uri completed the new orchestration. So we had at the beginning only the direction, we will show you, and then we had the additional parts that Ruthie found, and then Uri added to the additional parts a little bit of himself to complete what was missing in the score. We are in, we recruited Daniel Hoffman, so I have also a bunch of friends here, and Vera, who is going to sing later on, who also collaborated with me in another project. So we are today in May 2023, and Ruthie is terrified by my vision of having this full performance on stage. I don't know if at Carnegie Hall, but somewhere back in New York in 2 years from now. You have to dream to make things a reality. This is another document that we did with Miriam. Miriam, you remember this when what they did is they extracted all the texts from the scores so that we have also a sequence of the texts from the scores. The challenges of the archive, we have parts that we don't know to what they belong, a sort of march, number 6, but it doesn't correspond to anything else. The different versions of the same number. So one of the highlights of the Dybbuk is the scene number 6 or 5, depending on which version, which is an entire sequence on the Barbiere of Seville, which is very, very funny. Here you have the version of the Barbiere from the New York. That's where the version that Uri used, and you have the text that corresponds. You see, Mark, these are the same slides that you have. So, and yeah, I couldn't contain myself to show you that. So. Okay, so musical semiosis, and say the meaning of music, the effect of the music goes across cultures and across. So what these people had in mind is similar to what probably these Jews of Hollywood had in mind in the 1940s when they deployed the same music for the same comical effect. As we said, there are no scores in the Yiddish theater, but sometimes some score appear. Here we have like a string quartet, okay, part of one of the numbers. All of a sudden, someone orchestrated for a string quartet. This is the Hora Nacional, which we assume may be an encore to the piece. After the wedding, everybody starts, it's a beautiful piece, Daniel, to change. I think it's a real aura, a real quotation from an 16th piece. La da di da 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 di da 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 di la di da da la di da da. And this is in 3/8, which is very common to the Romanian aura, okay, the small Romanian aura. And we have many of the parts, not for this.
Yes.
And now regarding the sources, and here I want you to speak a little bit about Uri. Only last week, after we were working for 2 years, he sent me an email 2 minutes before Shabbat. He said, Edwin, I think I have one. Okay, so.
It just struck me that I was going over the notes, and I was listening to the MIDI representation of the score. And it just occurred to me that this number is stuck in my head for some reason. So then I realized I'm not Chabadnik. I'm not going to. I'm not a Hasid, but I do go sometimes to Chabad shul, to a synagogue, and they do sing this beautiful Avinu Malkeinu, which is originated at least I don't know, maybe 150 years ago, because it is attributed to like first Lubavitcher Rebbe or something. Whatever the case might be, I mean, I just realized that the second part of this number 4 is basically sort of turning around that very piece. I will demonstrate just this chorus, because this is a chorus. This is not where they sing Avinu Malkeinu. It's a chorus which is sung just by die, die, die. So there's no words, yeah. So they have it's the lower part. Okay, that's and then it goes. Okay, so what is interesting about it is that usually, I mean, in Hasidic tunes like that, you have this specific Jewish modus, of course, or Romanian, but it's Jewish, which is called Avaraba in the country tradition. But here, it goes sort of astray, because it goes, it breaks. Which is kind of unusual for Hasidic tunes. You would find this sort of thing in klezmer music sometimes, but not very often. And in Chabad, they have this major sort of modulations and stuff. But this made me think that if this is such a peculiar tune, and you have something so similar to it, if you really look to the opera. You feel the connection, right? So this peculiar modulation into the major suddenly with the B, not even B flat, but B. Suddenly, totally breaking the modus, yeah. So that made me think that it might well be.
Yeah, so which lead us to the sources of this musical pasticcio of the Dybbuk, ethnographic sources. So we may have already one. Pseudo-Hasidic, what I call Nigun language. Nigun language is just using the building materials of Nigun to compose, as Mark said, totally new Ashkenazi or pseudo-Hasidic music. Romanian music, the Ora, and perhaps other ethnographic sources. Opera, the Barbieri, and we have hall dances too, which are very characteristic actually of the Viennese operetta. okay, valses, and we have a beautiful polka in the Dybbuk. So there you go, you have an entire collection. The work in progress. So Uri, do you want to talk now about this? The first stage was simply to transcribe the direction, as is.
Exactly.
So that was the first stage. The second stage, Uri created a score, an orchestral score, full orchestral score, but includes only the direction, okay? Only the first
stage. And the parts which were available for that particular number each time.
Yeah, and this is with the parts that were available or not?
This is already, I think, a full
This is
score.
already yours? Okay.
I don't know if it's, here is a direction, and you see, so direction is basically just first violin and the vocal, which is absent in this particular place. But all the other things are already different parts which had to be juxtaposed. And the interesting thing is just to note is that this is the other direction, the other version from a Yassi, which I originally, without knowing anything, I assumed to possibly be second violin, which turned out not to be true. But it does work very well for this purpose, because it is sort of similar but very different also in a sense. So I did use it as a second violin.
And then this is already the full score that you have also in the document that we sent, that includes, therefore, the direction, includes the additional parts found, and Uri's
and
feelings.
The rest, right,
okay.
Exactly.
This is what I call Uri's archaeology. Uri dedicated a lot of time, and we had many Zoom conversations regarding the different parts. And one of the issues is a methodological problem, that we were working from the scannings done in New York. If we had in front of us the real paper, we could make a little bit more sense. And we can still do that. So we have to go to New York, both of us, and do this work. But it took a tremendous amount of work to identify the different parts and what it fits to what. So this is what we call the didactical score, which I think that is what you have. So we have two colors, okay, so that you can differentiate between the original archival materials and the additions of Uri. So if you have any complaints to Uri, don't complain about the color one part, but about the black and white part. We have, okay, do you want to talk about this piece, or we can play the pieces? And we have, as Ruthie said, the studio version of Shai Alon. So we have now 3 musical versions of the score. We have Uri's version, we have whatever Shai Alon added in the studio with his equipment, and what you're going to listen in a few minutes from. That's what Uri spoke of. Major.
Yeah, so there's, just to add to this, is a big challenge in most of the cases to figure out the tempo, because there are basically no tempo assignments, and when they come, they're sometimes totally misleading, because like in the first number you have twice written moderato, like at the beginning and then at the second part, which are clearly different tempos. just musically. I mean, so what does it mean moderato? So what did they mean? So again, it's a kind of a code which is only really to be read by people who already know the music. So we just guessed, and I wrote slow horror because that's what it sounded like to me. It's like tam, pam, this Romanian thing. But it could be much slower than that, actually. It could be tam, padam, padam. We don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't know.
I just want to get to the end so you can ask more questions to Uri. But this is a work in progress, nothing definitive here. We're just in the middle, I would say. The evolution of the score has to be refined, so there will be more revisions. We still hope that perhaps more parts may appear. You never know. In other archives, we know now much more about the individuals involved in all the original productions, dates of performances that need to be revised based on the score information, okay? And setting of the final play on stage with music will involve adjustments and perhaps the composition of original incidental music. As Mark mentioned before, we have all the rights in this genre to put our hands and add a little bit more of music. So thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So at this point, what we're going to do, we are going to listen to Daniel and Vera and Nadav, and then we will come back to the stage for questions regarding the reconstruction, the score. And again, thank you, Daniel and Nadav and Vera. Please, the stage is yours.
Lass mir schnell von den Dannen ziehen, da können wir nicht mehr anrieren. Ach, was hebt und noch zu tun, wir müssen laufen, wir wissen nicht wohin. Oje bitter, wieder teut. Helf uns, es ist heuf unser größer Neut. Helf uns, es ist heuf unser größer Neut. Kommt zum Rappen, kommt geschwinder, jo. Beweisen wird seine Wunder, jo. Lo mir fahr im Weinen klagen, die nicht gute zu verjogen, jo. Kommt zum Rappen, kommt geschwinder, jo. Beweisen wird seine Wunder, jo. Kommt zum Rappen, kommt geschwinder, jo. Beweisen wird seine Wunder, jo. Lo mir fahr im Weinen klagen, die nicht gute zu verjogen, jo. Kommt zum Rappen, kommt geschwinder, jo. Beweisen wird seine Wunder, jo.
Yeah, number 5.
gich, hab de gich, hot keine moire, hab de gich, hot keine moire, steh no svoir, gute Kinder, leg da Hand auf sie geschwinder, hab de gich, hot keine moire, hab de gich, hot keine moire, leg da Hand auf sie geschwinder, und mit uns kommt. Was tut men, sie haben uns der Sinn. Sie scheuen mir keine Mittel, von sie heust zu drehen, wer weiß es, mit uns wird noch geschehen. Ihr sollt euch nicht erwähnen, zu haben mein Malachabois. Ich will euch in der Erde rein, ich treib mit euch den Kaktus. Ich sag euch, ihr sollt am Weg, weil ein Kampf in den Kopf steht. Ai, 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 ai. Odzet nor, stehen dort, drei nicht geht. Habt ihr gich, hot keine moire, habt ihr gich, hot keine moire, steh nur ruhig, steh nur svoire, bunche Kinder, leg da Hand auf sie geschwinder, habt ihr gich, hot keine moire, habt ihr gich, hot keine moire, leg da Hand auf sie geschwinder, und kommt mit uns
Okay, number 6.
Ze nor tate mein uvdeis doch take sehr fein. Ze ich nehm mich on mein krivde, apikorsim sich noch kemeza. Ai, das Herz kennt gehen, wer es sieht dem Schwindel ziehen. Was lässt ihr euch also die Kämpfer drehen und dem falschen Schabt ein Zwie? Still du Reschen, sing dir Tate Liederlach, was du darfst von mir antehen, zu deine frume Koschereidelach, teug ich nur allein. Was hat ihr also auf mir der Sehen, was ihr flogt mich, lost mich frei. Ich nicht einzustehen, lost mich ab, ich bin vorbei. Still du Chutzpe, Zadik bin chon chatoim, das weißt du doch tate ganz recht. Losen aroi sein dir schoim, as ich bin dein frommer Knecht. Fallig, fallig bist auf Zures, weiß dir, ohne Bitte. Oi, du Teug, scheun auf Kapunes, bist geworden an Stigite. Still du Masik.
Number 7.
Ay bye 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 ay bye 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 ay bye 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 ay bye 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 ay bye 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 ay bye bye ay bye 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 ay bye 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 ay bye bye ya ba 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 ay dai 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 ay dai 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 ay dai 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 ay dai 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 tam. Ay daram pam pam ay 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 da 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 ay 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 ya ba bye ay ya ba bye bye. Oi weis du samoifes ake von dem Reben allein, dem Regen, oi dem Regen wei, dem Regensness is du geschehen, dem Regen, oi dem Regens wei, dem Regensness is du geschehen. Bye 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 ay bye 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 ay bye 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 ay bye 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 ay bye 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 ay bye 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 ya ba 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 bye ay dai 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 ay dai 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 ay dai 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 ay dai 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 dai. Daram pam 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 ya ba 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 bye 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 ya ba bye ya ba 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 oh weis du samoifes ake von dem Reben allein, dem Reben oi dem Reben zwei, dem Reben es ist du geschehen, dem Reben oi dem Reben dem Regensness is it all geschehen.
Wait.
Guten Tag, wir wünschen dir, sei uns gegrüßt sind. Groß ist unser Freude, Corona schier, dich zu sehen, liebes Kind. Seid willkommen, wir danken dir, seid willkommen, wir danken dir. Wir danken dir, Freundin. Seid gegrüßt, vor uns erzählt, seid gegrüßt, liebes Kind. Verzeiht mir, Freundin feine, Auf stehen Vereich ist mir jetzt schwer. Schlecht ist die Lage meine, krank bin ich sehr. Verzeiht mir, kränk dich nicht. Verzeiht mir, kränk dich nicht. Ach, es ist mir nicht gut. Kränk dich nicht, liebes Kind, wär's noch seine gesund, seine Freilich lo mir singen, jo freilich lo mir sein. Es ist uns Gott gelungen, geraten ist der Plan. Also verstellen sich maskieren, die Leben zu nah. Kommt lo mir mit parlieren, kein Sach dort nicht mit Wort. Nur schneller, 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 kommt lo mir schon gehen. Nur schneller, 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 sie wollen uns nicht sehen. Schneller, adieu, adieu, adieu,
I have one general question and then one specific question. Do you find any systematic variation between the European and the American scores with your Dybbuk?
Sorry?
Any systematic variation between the European and the American scores?
Not in particular. I mean, I would say that in Yassi's score, it tends to be less thought through, maybe in some sense, because you have, like Professor did mentioned and showed already before, you have like numbers which are in times which are less fitting for the music, but maybe they were more comfortable for local musicians or whatever. In general, you see also the script, the manuscript is much less like nice. I don't know how to say. Yeah. So the New York script is really like professionally done, and the other one is like like someone is writing for himself more or less. Yeah, and there are also keys changes, but no particular pattern in that.
Interesting, I asked because I've been with Ruthie looking at a different operetta by Hurgaz Ben Hador, and there we have an opposite direction movement. So we have an American operetta that then goes over to Europe. And while there's a good deal of variation in the American versions, we have a couple of scores, and we have many European scores, and they're all pretty much they're different from the American version, but they're all pretty much the same, which suggests to me that there was one American score that went over, and then that was the basis for all subsequent ones. So it's quite refined. So it's just interesting how we have different phenomena when you go in different direction. Then there's a very small one. Would you mind playing the second part of the Hasidic Nigun? Because I thought I heard something that is from elsewhere in in their Dybbuk.
The one I played?
Yeah, the second part, the one that was in
The major?
the D minor part, the second part. I don't know.
You mean
Next part. I switched keys on you there. But
You mean
you change it to major and it's like the bar girl. Yeah, I'm sorry, modulate on you.
yeah, maybe a little bit far-fetched, but could be. I mean, they could have like totally instant, inspirational sources, as Professor Slobin.
Edwin, the professor.
No, the before the.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned. I mean, it could have been just on the spot. What's interesting is just to mention that what you heard before is certainly not one part. Yes, I mean, you're aware of it. The very particular feature of this piece is that there is a paramount importance of choir. Which is present in like 90% of scenes, even when you have solo pieces. Yeah, so choir is like ticking on and off, and it's very much like a Greek theater. I don't know. It's like and there's much reaction on what's going on in the scene, and then so things of that sort. Yeah, so even one melody line could be divided between choir and the solo. So in the first piece which you heard, there's this middle part. So it's like one melody, but basically the solo is singing, and the choir marks. So it's overlay. Yeah.
Yeah, dialogue. Yeah, yeah. That's a very important point that we didn't mention. And that's in this play, at least, the absolute importance of the choir as a player, as a persona in this, the people, okay? So, and there are several people who are the choir.
It goes well together with your point of,
yes.
as opposed to the
so
angles.
what Vera was singing, at least 3 of the numbers are numbers actually that you have to vision an entire crowd, okay, whether of Hasidim or of women, okay, singing. So the effect obviously will be different. Yeah. Mark, please. Yeah, Sinai.
We started with the Romeo first number. It was really hard not to sing along, and I don't even know the music, so I'm wondering if all these core pieces are not also meant for sing-along of the audience, or especially the recurring audience.
That's an interesting point. There's an hypothesis, maybe. If, I don't know, Mark, perhaps you know more in the theater in America, particularly when the music started to be reproduced massively by scores and by recordings. If people knew by heart the song, they went to the theater. Did they join in?
That's more with the movies.
With the movies.
Established in the movie houses where people sang along. It was a whole genre. And people got used to going to movies to sing along in the community, but not in the Yiddish theater.
Not in the Yiddish theater. Okay. So maybe.
I'm curious about the orchestration. So your choice of orchestration as it comes out, how similar is it to mainstream music of the time? I mean, operettas of the period.
It is a stage orchestra.
It's the stage orchestra.
Absolutely. Look, we don't know. The part of the problem, the challenge which we were dealing with when recreating the score is that we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what we are missing. Yeah, I mean, we have parts, we have partial fragments of some parts, and we don't know what was else. So we went with what they call in the science razor. You go with the minimum of possible amount. So we just basically completed woodwinds with like oboe and flute, what we did, and the strings.
Metals.
No,
we kept what you want.
We kept all the wings. I mean, the most elaborate part was the brass, because that's the most what we have.
And also, you know, you have Gran Casa. Come on, for this piece, Gran Casa is the huge drum, okay? And timpani, and I mean, it's a huge amount of percussion.
Big.
What they had locally. If it was the regiment band, they probably had more trumpets and drums, you know, than if it was
Exactly. But they could have also tuba. They could have had piano. They could have had whatever. I mean, trumpets. We don't know. We just have cornets. We have horns.
But how standard was the orchestration in mainstream music in the late 1800s? In regular music.
1900s.
Yeah, I mean.
You mean in opera?
Yeah.
Opera had already huge orchestras by the time.
We're talking about Romanian operetta, but I don't know what their orchestration was. How close was this? They had some kind of sound ideal in their heads, you know, in addition to available resources.
Right.
And what was their sound ideal? Was it the grand opera? Was it the operetta, which is actually?
That's a good question. You know,
different orchestration or.
The good example to look at regarding this question is the Rossini piece, because when I was looking at the original score by Rossini and that score, I figured they didn't go with Rossini only in the very general outlines, but they made it much more oversimplified. It is clearly meant to be accompanying the vocal parts. You know, it's not anymore that beautiful piece of music, and they also have all sorts of embellishments put in tam-ta-ta-yam, which Rossini doesn't have. You know,
that's interesting.
Yeah, they do have. So when I went, I had to orchestrate. I went with the original of Rossini, of course. So I was like putting in the puzzle whenever it was possible, because some parts were already busy. So, you know, and I didn't want to touch anything original. So, you know, it's a kind of a mix. It's interesting.
You were just doing what they did.
Sorry?
You were just doing what they did.
Yeah, exactly. Probably. I mean,
putting it together out of available bits and pieces.
Yeah.
Probably.
It's a kind of bricolage, you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
Uri.
Yeah, I was curious. So yesterday we were looking at the different versions of the text a little bit, and we were shown the synoptic version with the 3 columns and how, you know, to synthesize some of the problems and some of the discrepancies between them. I'm just curious if you could share a little bit what you did with the music when you had different parts of the same song, or different versions rather of the same song that didn't agree with each other. What do you do? Like, what was your process of choosing where to take from, or did you prioritize the later or the earlier, the European or the US?
Oh, okay. No, the answer to that is simple. In general, the parts correspond to one vision of the music itself. I'm not talking about the texts under the music. And with the text under the music, I mean, what Vera sang is the New York Direction, which is the cleanest and clearest copy of all, and the most complete one. So when you look at all the versions we have, so some texts are literally appearing in one of the versions. Some others are variants, which is not surprising, but there are a few bits and pieces that are in none.
You're talking about the text?
About the text, I'm talking about the text.
Okay. But I mean the score, the music itself, the notes.
So the music, the numbers from what we have, the earliest one, from Yashi to New York, there are more or less the same.
Yes.
More or less the same. With variants, as we show, different tempi, okay? Different meter signatures, different scales, okay, different embellishments. I showed like the first version of the Barbieri is really the bare bones. It's very, very abbreviated. And in the New York version, it's much more expanded. It's like he knew the original score and he filled in a little bit more. Okay, so you have an evolution of certain pieces. And I think that we haven't checked, actually we need to do, what we didn't do, is a synoptic table of all the scores. So now that we know that there are dates and there are places, to have a synopsis and see how the clarinet part goes along in the 3 or 4 different versions we have, which is a stage that we haven't reached yet. I mean, I hope you understand that what we just heard and what we just seen is quite a miracle. I mean, if you consider where we started from, it's a very advanced stage. But certainly, as I said in the conclusion, this is just the middle road. We need to do much more in the future. So you have more work. It's not the end. And you too.
Can I continue just a minute about this miracle? Because I think, I mean, we've been working with these texts, Vera, for the last 2 years, and all of a sudden listening to them sung and listening to the way they integrate with music and that they sort of become a performance, this was magic for us. I think I can speak for all of us. So thank you so much for this. This was so incredible.
Can I ask Daniel? I can ask you a question as a klezmer. Do you find also I mean, as I said before, you have a pseudo Hasidic language, but also a bits also of the instrumental repertoire, because we have to make clear that klezmer music and Hasidic music are not the same. They interact, they intersect, but there is a certain types of instrumental music, like these horas that you have, are quite instrumental pieces. Do you feel that a klezmer would play in this orchestra will follow exactly the score, or will just play like a klezmer plays? Okay, like every repetition, making some changes.
I think the klezmer would try to play it the way it was written, or say the way a more classical player would play it.
But you added quite a bit, a little bit. You added a little bit for yourself.
Yeah. Actually, but I approached it, not always, but in general, I approached it as a klezmer musician trying to play classical music.
Okay. That's very interesting. Yeah. Okay.
So there's going to be some there's some music from klezmer within the score that is not klezmer.
Yeah.
Some ornaments or things like this.
Also, we don't know how many violins were. If there was 1 or 3 or 4, or if there was a section. Yeah. Jonathan.
You had a MIDI rendition.
The what?
A MIDI rendition previous to that?
Oh yeah, everything. Yeah.
And was it intentionally scratchy a bit, like early 20th century?
No, it's just the quality of this.
Yeah.
Well, it gives some flair.
There's a plugin like that, I think.
But it wasn't unintentional, I think.
No.
So maybe wonder about your dream for the reception of this project.
What is your dream?
Carnegie Hall.
We really, I think we want to see in the future the plays fully staged, with like a theater play with music. Basically, we didn't speak about genre, but it's self-understood also from yesterday that this is a Singspiel in a way. Okay, so you have the musical numbers and you have dialogues. A lot of dialogues. Also, only the Bube, she takes the entire half of the dialogue, and we want to see it reinterpreted in the spirit of our time. I don't think we want to recreate some truth that what.
Why not? I'm thinking of this.
No, but what I mean is, no matter what we will do, it will never be what happened in Yashi on that June of 1882. Okay,
or in New York.
Or in New York in 1907. Okay, so it will be a new reading, but it will be a new reading based on all this research project and the creativity of the musicians.
Well, I'm thinking this as in comparison to the Golden Kala, which they did put on in New York, the folks being there, which is fully orchestrated, which is from a later period. It's fully professional. As Rumshinsky, we know exactly what he meant. It's an operetta, and you can do it like an operetta. So the idea would be to say, yes, but earlier they did it this way, and these are the issues we were dealing with, and try to show it as an historical
Absolutely.
fact,
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
than trying to update
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
In contrast, say, to the Golden Economy.
Absolutely. Not only that, but I wouldn't certainly take a symphony orchestra or something like that. It will be a chamber
Stage
ensemble,
orchestra.
a pit with the instruments that we have the parts, plus a little bit more. And that's it. We may double the violin with 2 violins, but no more than that.
Yeah.
And it will be, and let's hope that we have very good actors and actresses that will also add a little bit of spices to that in terms of even improvising a tiny little bit. So, yeah, so that's our hope, Jonathan. If it will happen or not, we don't know, but we are all invited. We can start selling tickets now.
Join the
free. Yes. Final question?
Final question.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just thinking, we have 20 numbers here and a very long text as we only read part. So how do you envision this in terms of like the length? It sounds like a popular evening.
No, it won't be very long.
No, seriously, like how long would you imagine each number? Because you could do as many repeats and.
Some of these numbers are quite short.
Yeah, some of the numbers are very short, and it all depends on the decisions. There was going to be also a director, I assume. I hope the director doesn't swallow the whole thing like directors do today, and they keep a little bit according to the research results. But certainly, I assume that the piece at the most, even if you stretch it, won't be more than an hour and a half. No more than an hour and a half. It's top. If you do some repetitions, the choirs, you can assume that it repeats itself. You can cut that. And as you saw with what Mark showed, cut. Okay, if it's too long, just cut. Okay, Mozart did that too, so we can do that too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.